Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's session from Native Knowledge 360, Life Along the River, the Pamunkey and Indian Tribe of Virginia. Hako Wesila Samamo, I asked, how are you breathing in the Shawnee language, a traditional greeting, and I want to thank you for being here. My name's Renee Goki, and I am the Teacher Services Coordinator at the museum. I'm joined by a great group of colleagues who will help support in the chat for the evening and who are hosting the session. I'm a citizen of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma and a member of the Turtle Clan. I'm also Ukrainian and English on my mom's side, and all of this really helped shape my worldview and my effort to really, bridge our materials with all of you in the classroom. We will have a lot of resources in the chat for you, and the recording of tonight's session will go out to you after our session within the next week, and we'll also eventually have that up on our website to share with others. The title of this session is Becoming a Native Knowledge 360 Educator, and we are looking at the Treaty of Middle Plantation through a new digital storybook that's designed for grades 4 through 5 and a related lesson plan to teach about the Pamunkey Tribe of Virginia. This idea of becoming a Native Knowledge 360 educator is really a program and series of workshops and a process of change that involves realizing our potential as educators. So we know often our audiences are large and national. And some of you may be joining us for the very first time this evening, while others of you may have been in workshops before, or maybe joining but still an expert or Indigenous yourself. So everyone here is welcome, and we thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, we usually have a very lively chat. So if you'd like to share where you're joining from, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing where you're from and for your friendly greetings in the chat. So with our on-site programs and in-person programs, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their homes here today. So all of us are living on Indigenous land, and Native people, we really want to honor the stewardship that they've shown over the years. For thousands of years, Indigenous people have stewarded and honored and thrived in their homelands. And we know that land acknowledgements are really a first step in creating collaborative, ongoing relationships with Native people. And so if you're new to land acknowledgements, we have a one-page helpful handout that we'll put in the chat. We have some professional development on it. And there's a lot of other really important work that's being done by a lot of Indigenous groups and universities and colleges on how to make sure that this is not a performative task, but instead a really respectful way to honor Native people, but also to keep the relationship going. So we invite you to explore those resources. By being here as part of this workshop tonight, teachers like you are contributing to our newly adopted vision of the National Museum of the American Indian, which is really about transforming teaching and learning. And we developed this framework called Native Knowledge 360, our framework for essential understandings about American Indians, to really provide a tool for you to have language and key concepts that not only can frame your understanding, but that of your students. So again, it's a working tool that's also in the chat, and it's in English and Spanish. So we have some print copies, but very much it's online and available freely. In addition, the way that these were developed is because we know Native people are often taught about first in social studies classrooms and through social studies curriculums. And so we started with the 10 themes for the National Council for Social Studies, and then followed those themes to develop this language that you can then use in your classroom specific to Indigenous peoples or American Indians. So we actually selected one of the essential understandings, and that's essential understanding number 6 around power, authority, and governance, to frame our understanding for the evening. So the key concept is that long before European colonization, American Indian governments and leaders interacted, recognized each other's sovereignty. They practiced diplomacy, as you're seeing in this picture here from 1928. We see, leaders from the Pamunkey tribe, as well as state leaders in Virginia, near the Virginia capital, paying a treaty tribute way back in 1928, and this tradition still exists today. So we're seeing this practice of diplomacy. They also built strategic alliances, waged wars, and negotiated peace accords, and continue these relationships with the United States government today. So again, this language, while a lot, it can be shortened, but parts of it could be used in your classroom, or you might use a whole key concept to frame your students' understanding. So we invite you to explore that free resource in the chat. So I alluded to the vision and mission of NMAI, which we call National Museum of the American Indian for short, NMAI. And we've had this same mission statement for many, many years. So we have worked in partnership with Native peoples and continue to do so, and their allies, and we consider you allies as teachers in the classroom. We do this work in partnership to foster a richer shared human experience through a more informed understanding of Native peoples. We've also more recently, in the last few years, developed a new vision statement that's aligned with equity and social justice for Native peoples of the Western Hemisphere through education, inspiration, and empowerment. So we really feel like Native Knowledge 360 is very much in line with our vision and mission. And we're so glad you're joining us on this journey. So I think I already mentioned that Native Knowledge 360, or NK360 for short, is our national education initiative to transform teaching and learning about Native Americans. And we're really seeking at the Smithsonian in general to reach all K through 12 classrooms in the nation. So here's some considerations for the program. We are looking at, just to begin, at the sort of beautiful sunrise. This is in our Native New York exhibition, which is where many of my colleagues work. We have a sister facility in New York City, and you see this spiral here of shells, and I believe they're quahog clam shells. And so again, we see this as a process, and our programming as a process of learning. And we ask, and we've observed very much, that people always show a real willingness to listen and have meaningful conversations with others. So thank you for doing that in the chat. And also, sometimes we ask for some unlearning or some uncomfortable or difficult discussions as well. And so we ask that you continue to have an ability to reflect on difficult things while staying curious and open. I always like to say, too, that I'm not an expert on Native peoples. While I belong to a Native nation and I have experience with a lot of different tribes and have done this work for a number of years, there's so much to know, and there's so much diversity among different Native nations that it really, there's a lot of expertise that lies with nations and communities themselves, and it can look very different. The knowledge and certain types of specific knowledge that people might have. So there's just so much richness and depth that I'm not an expert, and I'm often learning alongside of all of you as well. So we encourage you to ask questions, and we will do our best to answer them in the chat. And if we can't answer it now, we'll try and follow up with some resources. So we actually started this this workshop series with some key ideas back in mid-January. We had session 1, and we looked broadly at treaties and provided some big ideas around treaties that we felt were really foundational to setting up these next 3 sessions, where we've looked at specific treaties and a particular grade range. So from that first session, 3 sort of valuable, we think, key ideas from session 1 are: first, as represented in the left-hand picture of a replica Hiawatha wampum belt, this idea that treaty making existed long before Europeans. And so tribal nations were having diplomacy with one another and making formal agreements. They were building alliances as well. And they had, and still have, often their own systems of government that are traditional, and they may have adopted modern day, kind of modeled after Western styles of government as well. And so these wampum belts were used among tribal nations before Europeans and later the United States began to make treaties and formal agreements with Native nations. Second, as seen in the middle picture, treaties are the supreme law of the land. So as European nations and later the United States began to make formal written paper treaties, which you see here, they have always been the supreme law of the land as stated in Article 6 of the US Constitution. It's important to know too that they have very much been used as tools to dispossess Native people of their lands. And at the same time, it's important to know that Native people have used them to assert their rights in difficult times and for future generations. So there is agency among Native nations as well. And we'll be looking at some of the complexity of that tonight. Finally, third, treaties are ongoing and tribes continue to assert their sovereignty and act as citizens of their nations and as citizens of the United States. So we see on that far right picture, a work by Shan Gosworn, who was Eastern Band Cherokee, a wonderful artist. And this is called Peace Treaty, Spider's Web. And you'll notice that the top is unfinished. So she took different pieces of treaties and created splints and warps and wefts to actually do traditional Cherokee weaving. But these were specific treaty samples, photocopies of treaties and sometimes photographs. And the reason this is left unfinished at the top is to show that treaties are ongoing and that they're still vital and relevant today. They're not just dusty papers from the past. So our goal and purpose for this evening is to connect you to a Native Knowledge 360 framework, to our Essential Understandings Guide, which we introduced you to already, and the Middle Plantation Treaties lesson. And finally, to support teaching about treaties with your students. So that is the ultimate goal. So our learning objectives are organized in our lessons, especially with our newer lessons, into 3 sections. There will be things that students should know, understand, and do. And so we've taken this same organization for tonight and sometimes even use those same student objectives for our learning this evening. So we hope that you'll walk away knowing that the Pamunkey people lived in the Chesapeake Bay region long before the English started the Jamestown colony in 1607. The contemporary stories of Pamunkey people's culture, traditions, and ongoing legacy are vitally important to teach today as well. So they continue to ensure their sovereignty through practicing their rich traditions and promises that are protected by the treaty they made that we'll examine tonight. And interestingly, they have the oldest reservation in what is now called the United States. We hope that you'll understand that over time, laws and actions of English settlers and later of the state of Virginia and the United States negatively impacted how the Pamunkey Indian tribe could govern themselves. It negatively impacted them, but it did not stop them from governing themselves. Here you see a picture, a historical picture of Theodora, and she's a Pamunkey tribal member. She's wearing a feather scarf of goose, duck feathers, and also I looked it up because it said sheldrake, and I found out that that was it's a native duck from the mid-Atlantic region, and apparently it's beautifully brightly colored. So you can imagine just how these would keep someone really warm. It's just a beautiful picture that you'll find in the storybook as well, and she's an important member of the Pamunkey community. Finally, our last learning objectives are around do. So students will be able to read and analyze a primary source to determine what the Pamunkey lost and what they gained from the treaty. And just one section is what we'll be looking at tonight. Then students will come to conclusions about how a treaty can be a tool for protecting a community. And we added this objective in for all of you teachers. So our objective is that we hope you will use NK360 with your students. So here's how we're going to get through the work tonight. Here's our agenda. So we're going to introduce you to this Native Knowledge 360 model that we've been developing. We always begin with spark, and that's the idea of sparking inquiry, and we'll do that through a place activity. Next, we move over to connect, where we'll look at community and culture and try and connect with you as learners, and some opportunities for you to think about how that also translates to connecting with your students through exploring their own community and culture. Third, we'll learn, so we'll actually dig into the treaty analysis, look at the gains and losses, and have some discussion. And fourth, and finally, we will act. So we're going to take some time to think about the lesson, think about our learning, and what our next step might be, and how we have some questions for you, how we can support you better too. So that's how we're going to move through the work. Before I get started with the timeline, I wanted to mention that there is this nice timeline we'll talk about, but also there are 4 chapters that organize the digital storybook. Place is chapter 1, community and culture is chapter 2, history, chapter 3, and 4th, looking to the future. So those are the 4 themes of the storybook. And we start with the digital storybook with this timeline introduction. So here, we really want to get across this idea to young people and really to all of us that if we look at the left, we see that the Pamunkey ancestor settlements in the Virginia, what's now Virginia, in the mid-Atlantic region are 12,000 plus years. So they've been here, they're people for more than 12,000 years. And sometimes if you talk to some indigenous communities, they say, we've been here forever. You know, our origin stories tell us we came from this place, or we came from this particular, sacred landscape. And so it's really important just to think about that longevity of the Pamunkey people. And we've taken some key ideas or, events in history that are really important, that are taught and might be familiar to students, but just to kind of give a little bit of perspective. And so you see things that look familiar, like the Egyptian pyramids, or the Great Wall of China, or Teotihuacan. And finally, you see the ships, and that's representing 1607 in Jamestown. So, relatively short period of time, 400 years from when Jamestown till today. And then we think about the ways, the relationships that the Pamunkey, their ancestors, and other Native tribes, indigenous peoples from what we call Turtle Island, or these lands, the time that it takes to build those memories, those relationships with the land and water, and that stewardship. So deep, deep connections, ancestral stories and places for thousands of years here. So when we are often taught about Jamestown, and I didn't grow up on the East Coast, so I didn't get as much of that story. We sort of had a different kind of a Lewis and Clark narrative where I grew up. But with Jamestown, it is a very short period of time, and it really is important to teach, but often the Native perspective is missing from that narrative. And it's important to, of course, recognize and teach that that history didn't start when Europeans came to these lands. So, we wanted to start with the chapter 1, place, and we started to talk as a team about how different it might look if we deepened our students' connections to the places around them. And we hope that this lesson helps to do that, and have them think about what it means to live and steward a place, whether your family has been here for 1, 2, 100, 100 years, like, the whole gamut of what our experience is in these lands, and thinking about a shared home now and how we can steward these places. So we're going to start with sparking inquiry, because it encourages curiosity and it generates new questions and interest. So we're going to turn to you in the chat, and we want to think about, what is a place that is special to you? So go ahead and just list that place, maybe in one word if you can, in the chat, and then why in one word. So the place and why. And I'm going to follow along in the chat with you, and I often jot things down along the way. What is this place that's special to you? And one word, why? Family farm, and there's connection there. Thank you for sharing. Susquehanna River, my home. Great. So I'm hearing family, home, Zion, Grand Canyon, Woodstock, my home away from home. Jamestown, it's where my family started. The UK, my native home. Washington State, memories. Summer camp I went to as a kid. Beaches, nature connection, feeling safe. Window Rock, home. Lewis, family origin. Ganawage, my home and reserve. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm hearing a lot about family, home, safety, good memories on the land, um, and these places. Thank you for sharing. So now we're going to introduce you a little bit to Pamunkey landscapes. So here's a picture of the regional environment, and water really defines the region and even the people here in the mid-Atlantic. So you see a lot of wetlands, and Tuckahoe is an important food source for the Pamunkey people. So those are all the plants pretty much that you're seeing in the water. They kind of have an arrow type shape, and they're also called arrow arum because of their shape, I believe. So Tuckahoe requires very clean water to be safely edible. And I've heard actually from an elder, I don't know if he's in the room. He was here last time we all met. His name's Rico Newman. And I think it was him that told me that women traditionally would use their feet to pull these up. And they have this kind of root tuber at the bottom. And when you dry those out, they provide kind of a potato starchy and really important energy and food source for local tribes. So it's really an important traditional food, but it requires really clean water to be edible safely. So the natural resources gave the people from the mid-Atlantic region everything they needed to live for generation after generation. And here we have a map as described by John Smith. So this is his perspective and observations where he recorded the land, the water, and the people. And this map has been reprinted several times. And we think it was first created on paper in 1609 and then printed in 1612. And so this is the example that we're looking at here. And we're going to do a thinking routine to just get us thinking about a few things: perspective, to generate curiosity about this map, which is also in the lesson. And so we're going to do a see, think, wonder very simply. So first, you're just going to use the chat to tell us what you see. And I will be able to zoom in a little bit as well. I guess I have to open the chat again. Thanks, Yadira, for putting that in the chat. So what do you see? Very simply, before we jump to thinking or inferences or guesses, let's start simply with what you are seeing. The longhouse, the types of trees native to the region, natural resources. Great. So when the English arrived in 1607, the Pamunkey were part of a united group of 33 Algonquin-speaking tribes known as a Powhatan chiefdom. You see an image of Powhatan here, again from John Smith's perspective, but we see gathering with the leader or chief, we think the chief, mountains, forest. So what do you think about what you're seeing? That is the next question. So we've made some observations about what we've seen. We've seen some natural resources, some depictions of people. What are you thinking about what you see? And some of you noticed the trees. One of the interesting things that we found out together is there are at least 5 types of trees represented on this map. So they're sort of probably fairly quick drawings. But we noticed that there were so many. mountains and trees, as you all have alluded to. So it makes me think that, this region is very rich in flora and fauna. A little background is that tribes in the chiefdom paid taxes to Powhatan in exchange for protection. At the time, taxes included corn, furs, copper, and such items instead of money. So we're seeing a lot of abundance. We're seeing, a leader, a chiefdom, we think as evidenced by the word Powhatan in that earlier picture of him. So what are you thinking about when you look at this early map? Yeah, landscape symbols. Yeah, and I'm not sure. That might look like to me maybe a crown. I don't know if those are symbols of family lineage from John Smith or the English. It's curious. And we see some words. We see this person here on the right, and we don't know if this is John Smith. I'm thinking, is he trying to depict a warrior, or is he trying to depict somebody who's a good hunter and with this abundance and the clothes and the long bow? So we don't know. We're seeing depicting an aristocracy, both familiar and other to Europeans. Yeah, thank you. And finally, what's a new wondering that we have? What's a new wondering that you have? So go ahead, and if you have a new wondering about what you're seeing, yeah, is that an animal behind the hunter? We couldn't figure that out. We weren't sure. It sort of looked like one of us thought a pig, and we didn't know what was going on there, or was it a fox? So, it's curious. Yeah. So this generates some sort of questions and curiosity about the map. A little more background is that Powhatan, known more accurately as Wahoo Seneca, was the paramount chief of this chiefdom of 33 tribes. We're also seeing, interestingly, this Virginian Sea. So John Smith is sort of, labeling this the Virginian Sea. Is he naming the people to, one of my wonderings, is he naming all these different people? Because there are, tribal names and words on here too, to colonize or to document or both. And then that first photo, somebody's wondering about the orientation of the map. Yeah, so one of the things that we heard about this map is that often we think of a map, we see north and the Breton, and we kind of orient ourselves to which direction we're going, right? But this is actually oriented where north is to the right of the map. So we think maybe because he was coming via water. And then we're seeing the coat of arms. Interesting. We're getting some background from one another on possibilities with the imagery in the map. That's great. Thank you for joining the conversation, everyone. Much of the land and many of the rivers in what is now Virginia were part of the Powhatan chiefdom. And it's important to say this again, I think, is that maps have been used as tools of dispossession. I mentioned treaties earlier, but also they can be used to show the richness of Native people on the land in 1607. And that's one of the interesting things, is that not only, is this land kind of represented with the region and the environment, but this is not a terra nullius map or empty land map. Ready, often early maps were kind of showing these quote unquote empty lands, and that they needed to be populated, by colonists and things like that. But in fact, this map is quite different. So that was we were curious about that, and really does show the Native people on the land in 1607. Now we're going to look specifically at the Pamunkey connections to land and water and how their community has maintained many of their rich traditions, particularly fishing and pottery, from chapter 2 of the storybook, which is about culture and community. So you see sort of the front page of each of the chapters as we move through the work tonight. So we are in the connect section of this professional development. So the Pamunkey have long believed that if you take fish from the water, you must put some back. And this cultural value helps to ensure that there will always be more fish. So you see two women here, Pamunkey tribal members, and they have some really interesting environmental efforts that they're working on with the Pamunkey River and specifically with the sturgeon, which is a historically very important traditional fish to them. And I've heard that the Pamunkey River is only the second river in Virginia that has seen the return of the sturgeon. So this is a kind of nice modern picture, and you'll notice the net in the back. So Pamunkey people, their ancestors, and even some people today will use nets, others will use fishing poles, but they use those nets often for the shad fish. And the way that they're sized, they have a wooden kind of gauge and a ruler to measure out the net. So they're just, the holes in the net are big enough to keep the fish that are important to feed and sustain and nourish the community, but to let the smaller ones out so they continue to be replenished and are available for the next generations. They also have a hatchery on their reservation. Additionally, they have one of the oldest, if not the oldest, ongoing pottery tradition on the East Coast in an indigenous community. So they've been making pottery for thousands of years, and they gather the clay both traditionally and I think sometimes today. Sometimes people will gather it along the banks of the river today. They might also buy their clay today, but historically they would gather it along the banks of the river. So you see this picture from 1918 that's in the storybook. And we loved also noticing these two boys that are very much a part of this picture and that are kind of laying there observing generational learning that's happening. So multi-generational teaching and memories on the land create traditions, and which some of you alluded to in your when you were talking about a place that's special to you, and they build community and culture and sustain us. The Pamunkey people again have an old and rich pottery tradition, and here you see some contemporary examples of their pottery. I just love the fish pot. And we notice there's a turtle, a terrapin turtle, I think, and all these great designs on their pottery. So getting a little taste of the Pamunkey pottery traditions. So this is an example of one of the student worksheets that is part of each chapter. In fact, there's a little bit of a different question in each chapter, and this opens up each of the chapters. So these student worksheets are available in the digital storybook. And here kids are asked to think about their own community and traditions. So we'd like you to think about Pamunkey traditions. So they think about, you know, their own traditions that are important, and then they do the digital storybook, they go through it and then write or draw traditions important to Pamunkey. But I'd like you to think about the Pamunkey traditions of pottery and fishing. How do you think those traditions build community? I'm going to ask you to share in the chat. And this is, of course, the information I'm giving you tonight is quite abbreviated from the digital storybook. So we just pulled out, you know, very kind of introductory elements of pottery and fishing. Yeah, preserving the future. Pottery is such a hands-on experience that needs to be taught through close proximity, passing knowledge and skills between generations, harvesting their special clay, something they're taught and remains culturally unique to them. Absolutely. Reciprocity, sharing of food. A whole family partakes together, gathering and preparing food, connecting to the earth together. It's all really important, right? Connecting to those special places and making memories and carrying on these traditions are so important. I've got to say, I've been to Pamunkey, the reservation before, and they had this wonderful crab feed for us. And we just sat around on these picnic tables and laughed, and it was a really very nice experience. So that reciprocity and sharing of food, they were wonderful hosts. Social emotional learning used to be taught. Yeah, that's a good point. And how often, it's supporting the whole child, right? Thank you for sharing. So now that we've learned a little bit about the region and people, and again, just an introduction, and you're starting to learn just a little bit about what is at stake in an introduction to this region, let's learn more about the 1677 treaty and promises and exchanges that were made. So now we're in the learn section. And again, we're going to look at the Treaty of Middle Plantation. We are also showing you the front landing page of chapter 3, history. And you'll notice there's handouts for this for each of the chapters. So there's 2 for students and usually a lesson plan for teachers. And those student worksheets are quite short. So in our Learn section, we wanted to show you the statue of Kokkoqueski, and this is from the Virginia Women's Monument in Richmond, Virginia. She's shown here holding the 1677 Treaty of Middle Plantation, and she was a leader and signer of the treaty. The Pamunkey people actually told us, he said, often Pocahontas, is the story that's told about our people, and about sort of this early history, or John Smith, or John Rolfe, if we're being more accurate. But there's the whole Colors of the Wind and the Talking Raccoon. All of that aside, the Pamunkey people felt it was really important, to really have an accurate telling and to tell the narrative about Kokkoqueski, because she was an important diplomat to the people, and she actually signed the treaty. So not trying at all disparage Pocahontas and the role she played, but it's almost become mythical, the stories about her, and there's a lot of inaccuracies in the stories that are told of her. So the Pamunkey people said, we really want you to introduce people and learners to this woman. So you see here, there is the sign of what they say, the Queen of Pamunkey. And so that W, that is an actual signature from her and other signees, I guess, or signers of the treaty. So here is the front cover. And what we're going to do is, as a whole group, we're going to just model the primary source activity of the lesson from the student worksheet. So on the left, you see the cover. And on the right, you see the treaty analysis worksheet, which was available under that student's worksheet that I showed you earlier, chapter 3. And we're going to very simply, as a whole team and in the chat, we are going to answer the first question. So the first kind of observed questions we see are some basic facts from just the cover of the treaty alone. So having students learn what primary sources are, that they were made at the time of the event, and simply to practice reading them is a really important step. So very simply, who made the treaty? Let's go ahead and use the chat. We're actually going to do the student learning, so we all feel really confident about using this and even know the types of questions that might arise, and if there's any complexity to the questions or answers too. So it's always good to do that before we take these into our classroom. So very simply, who made the treaty based just on the cover? Who do we think? Charles II. That's right. And apparently he was at the time the King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. So quite a lot. Indian, quote, Indian kings and queens. That's right. The King of England. Yes, all of this. That's great. So when was it made? Let's move on to the next question for students. When was this treaty made? 1677, so May 29th. And finally, where was it made? This is a little bit trickier. I'm hearing May 19th, not 29th. I don't know the answer to that. This is saying May 29th. London question mark Yeah, that's what we were wondering too. That would, I think that'll be um, a natural response from students. And what we found out is it was printed in London, but it was actually made at Middle Plantation. So that's why it's called the Treaty of Middle Plantation. It's also called the Articles of Peace. We see at the top in big bold print. And actually, Middle Plantation was a town in 1632 that was the capital at the time. And it eventually, the capital of Virginia eventually became Williamsburg, Virginia in 1699. And today, the capital of Virginia is Richmond. So even teaching students, about how capitals move and change over time, depending on history. And, our own US capital has changed, right, from different locations. So I am seeing some interesting comments in the chat. So Indian kings and queens is kind of a conundrum. So it was the comment in the chat, and that's right. So this is from the perspective probably of, the Europeans. So they aren't using the terms that Pamunkey people and other tribes from this region would use for themselves. They're using their own worldview, their own perspective to call these people Indian, which is a general term, right? It's not specific, but there were multiple tribes that signed this. So we're focused kind of on the Pamunkey tonight, but there were multiple tribes. So they're kind of putting everyone together and they're calling them Indians, and also kings and queens, which was it's a hierarchical monarchy and not necessarily the system that these communities had. Instead, they had chiefdoms, and there was, kind of reciprocity and taxes and things that were charged, but also there was protection and other things underneath that system. So yes, it's an ethnocentric viewpoint. That's right. Yeah, so we kind of can have interesting conversations, I think, with our students. So, we also ask students to think about and reflect, think about what they're seeing, which is what you're all modeling in the chat. What do you think this treaty was about? We don't have a ton to go on, but, probably they're getting in big bold letters, this Articles of Peace. So maybe, it's about peace. Why do you think this treaty was made? It is important for you all to know, we don't go in depth in it in the storybook, but that there was a treaty before this in 1646. So doing a little bit of research on that, I think would be a nice step, just so you feel really comfortable and confident with sequences of events. And we also often teach teachers that really often when you're teaching about treaties, you want to look at events that are preceding, or if there were treaties preceding, and then were there treaties after. So it's very hard to teach a treaty in isolation. We recommend, starting maybe with one treaty, but then learning about what's happening before and after in more context. So we're getting ready to do a breakout room. Before you leave, we're going to tell you how it works. So we're going to ask if you can self-select in your breakout room, and we have probably the smallest group in a professional development online we've ever had. So we can have nice small groups. So if somebody can volunteer in your group, thinking about if you want to be a note taker, grab a piece of paper and pencil, just kind of jot some things down for the group, that'd be great. Another person might want to be the spokesperson. We may, if we have time, come back and see if somebody from the NMAI team or someone in the chat in the breakout room might share. So we'll kind of see how we're doing on time with that. But what you're going to do is we're going to put in the chat for you a link, and you will read Article 7 of the Paraphrased Treaty. You're going to answer the questions that are on the student worksheet about gains on the left. What did the Pamunkey get? And what did the Pamunkey lose? And you see the paraphrased Article 7 in the center of that worksheet. So that is a clip from the worksheet itself. And importantly, when you're in your breakout room for 8 minutes, leave a little time at the end, at least 3 minutes, hopefully, if not more, for discussing how can a treaty be a tool for protecting the community, even if there were losses. So save yourself some time there. We're going to have some staff in the breakout rooms to help support you. Yadira is putting that all of that in the chat for you. And before you leave, though, we know you might be on phones or might not be able to see it. So we're just going to read this for you just so everybody has it, and then you'll be able to take it in the breakout room again. So again, Article 7, paraphrase version, just because we have the original for students to look at and the paraphrase, just because sometimes the language can be a lot easier to understand and access the material, access the text more. So the paraphrase version says, the Pamunkey and other tribes of the region may gather oysters, fish, and gather plants and other foods on the lands that now belong to the English colonists, as long as the foods and plants aren't needed by the English. The Pamunkey must get permission from the English first. The colonists can't refuse permission to the Pamunkey if the Pamunkey quickly get the foods, plants, and fish they need, do not carry any weapons, and do not enter the colonists' homes. So again, we're going to send you off in breakout rooms for 8 minutes. Take a piece of paper, pencil, somebody think about being a spokesperson, and we hope you have a good discussion. All right, everybody, I think you're all back from the breakout rooms. I hope you had good conversation there. And we're going to try this. Let's see. Does anybody on the NMAI staff, do we want to use kind of the chat to talk about gains and losses? Or does anybody want to unmute from our team and share with the conversations they had?
I'll go ahead and jump in because I felt that our group had just a really wonderful and honest and rich conversation. We really left off with discussing whether or not a treaty can be used as a tool to protect one's community. And I think we really thought about, well, you know, the treaty has such a it carries so much emotion and so much of this reputation of not being withheld, synonymous with just, you know, lies. So while we didn't explore what those tools could look like to protect a community, we did talk about, well, treaties might not exactly be the type of tool as we look in the future. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for sharing about the group's conversation. So I'm hearing a lot of, it sounds like really deep conversation. And then this question is posed, you know, can it be really used as a tool to protect a community? And I think the other question you said you didn't have time for yet, which would be interesting to explore, or what are other tools to protect a community? That seems like a really important thing. And one that, you know, many tribes are, you know, developing their own tools, and they're going back to language and culture. And there's a lot of efforts there to protect their community. And then, of course, community and culture changes over time as well. So very complex. Thank you for sharing. And I also, we have in a few past sessions talked and provided specific examples of how tribal nations are using their sovereignty to protect their people, their community, their future generations. So you want to check out those recordings. All right, anybody, anything in the chat? So group 3 talked about the gains. They got fish and to gather as long as English didn't need it. I know I was trying not to sound sarcastic when I was reading it. Very ironic. Some safety though, they did get some safety. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, everyone. So that is the student worksheet and activity. And I think, you know, it gives us some new questions to explore as well. So we talked about this. And now we're in the 4th and final portion of the wheel, the NK360 wheel, the act portion. And now it's our turn to kind of think about our next actions. You were again seeing the sort of screenshot of the front page of each of the chapters. So here we have chapter 4. looking to the future, which is the theme for chapter 4. And our ultimate goal is really to get you using these resources with your students and to keep up the momentum. So one of the important questions that we ask students, and we're going to ask you, is why do you think it's important to teach that the Pamunkey are still here today? So go ahead and use the chat to answer that question. Why do you think it's important to teach that the Pamunkey, or maybe another native tribe, namely we're talking about the Pamunkey tonight, are still here today? And there's a couple really good quotes in the storybook from community members talking about there's been changes, but we're still here. Yeah, because regular textbooks don't mention them. That's right. We're trying to fill those gaps. You know, Native people have been, we did a textbook study at the museum, and we looked at 23 of the most commonly used social studies textbooks, and we very much found exactly what you're saying. Very limited information about Native people in textbooks. It's important to teach and appreciate their sovereignty to ensure that erasure of people and nations by colonization is wrong, and that we have to rectify this. So I'm hearing not only that there's an injustice, but that we should do something about it. This history supports sovereignty and treaties. Traditional Anglo attitude is that these people no longer exist, right? We have to counteract some of those stereotypes and that erasure. It seems Indigenous people are treated like an artifact. Yeah, and kind of authoritarian views of, you know, classifying Native people and so forth, and some of those disciplines of, you know, anthropology and things. And so, of course, we've got to counteract those views and to show that the Pamunkey people are still here. They're not only people from the past, but very much vibrant. We need to teach the truth, and that people are not past with history. Respect and truth is important. Absolutely. Yeah. Too many people think only of the Western Native American as the survivors. Yep. We need to, the textbooks sort of forgot the Native people on east of the Mississippi. Yeah. These are all really great responses. Thank you all for sharing. I'm sorry I didn't get to read every single one, but I think that this is, you're really getting at the heart of the work and this importance of teaching that Native cultures are still very much vibrant and here today. It's really important to counteract the older stereotypes. So the Pamunkey people have always recognized themselves as a tribal nation. And here you see sort of victory or celebration photograph of tribal citizens. They're actually family members. And this was in May 28th, 2018. They had a gathering on their reservation to celebrate their federal recognition. And federal recognition, we say it in the storybook for students very simply, it means that Native American tribal governments have a nation-to-nation relationship with the United States, which guarantees tribal members certain services as members of federally recognized tribes and programs from the federal government. So these aren't, you know, special rights that are given to Native people. These are guaranteed because many of us our people, our ancestors signed treaties for these rights. So we gave up land and things for, you know, education and different types of things. So this falls under that. And the interesting thing is that the United States, they only recognized the Pamunkey in January of 2016, more than 400 years after Europeans first invaded their lands. So there was a long fight, a long road of them writing for over 35 years, letters and seeking this federal recognition and by the government. But again, remembering that they've always been Pamunkey. They've had their pottery traditions, they have their reservation, their 1,200 acre reservation, just kind of surrounded and hugged by the Pamunkey River. And a very important sort of lifeblood of the Pamunkey people is the river and land. And they have a unique and important history and thriving culture today. So we're going to ask you next. We've had I think some really good ideas in the chat, and we wanted to give you a moment to share with your expertise and ideas with your colleagues in the chat. What might be your next step in using the digital storybook or the lesson? It might be that you want to explore one of the resources we shared. Maybe you have a new question you want to research. Maybe it's as simple as using more color photographs of Native people like the one you see here, of contemporary Native people or Pamunkey people in your classroom. Register for another session, perhaps. Print the worksheet. What do you think? Any ideas in the chat? I'm going to open it up. Yes, the Mattaponi are neighbors of the Pamunkey. They absolutely are. And there's some really good work happening by the Mattaponi people. Thank you for sharing. It's really important. So maybe it's learning more about the Mattaponi or the other tribes in the Mid-Atlantic region, some of you may even be members of. We have often have tribal members who come to some of these sessions. So we hope you'll do some of the, some of our suggestions or have your own suggestions to explore. And you can't wait to see the digital storybook. That's great. It is available and online. And I think we've put it in the chat, and we'll put it in the chat or share it back out with you. So thank you so much. We have a new idea. We're thinking about how to support you. And so there's a couple different ways that we might do that. One is that we encourage you to come back for another session. This particular session on February 27th at 7 p.m. again is our next professional development. It is on the Navajo Treaty of 1868. And it asks the compelling question, why was the Navajo journey home so remarkable? So again, it's online. It has Native perspectives and images and documents, other primary and secondary sources to help students and teachers understand this treaty and why the Navajo maintained an unflinching resolve to return home. So we hope you'll register for that session. That should also be in the chat for you. So we hope you'll join us there. And that's going to be put in the chat. And the second thing we wanted to ask you about really quick, two things we're going to ask for your feedback. One is we've been thinking about office hours as a way to get together kind of if you could drop in, we could be open or available for like an hour sometime. We're kind of exploring that. So we wanted to do a poll real quick and really simply just ask you, would you participate? Would you be interested in office hours? So smaller group, although this is a nice small group this evening. And it might look like, you've tried something in your classroom and you want feedback, or you want to learn how to navigate the website, and we just spend time doing that. You might want to discuss how this fits into your curriculum, or although we do align things with, of course, with standards, but maybe you have some other questions or you can't find something. You might be able to ask questions about this content or the approach, anything that you might want to bring to the table. We're just sort of curious. Okay, and I know it depends on when it is and all of that, but this gives us an idea that about 3/4 of you are interested in something like office hours. So we just wanted to explore how that might look, and also find out if you're using things in your classroom. So thank you so much for helping us help you, essentially. We know whether to do those or not. So thank you so much. Again, we hope you'll register. And our second to last thing is that we are going to put in the chat a quick survey for you. And this is really important to our work because we're trying to understand our audiences better, and also, what's happening from your perspective with the learning, what's meaningful to you. how valuable is it to teach about treaties in your opinion? So we have a few questions for you. Again, it's in the chat. And after you fill it out, it'll take about 3 minutes. You will get a certificate for your time this evening that can be used and shared with your administration. So we really, while you fill that out, just want to tell you how much we appreciate all the work that you do each and every day, and the important role that you play in transforming teaching and learning about Native people. You absolutely are. We are allies in this work, and we really appreciate and want to serve you better. And we appreciate everything you do for our children and for the next generation. So thank you again. We're very appreciative. Thank you for filling out that survey. Again, if you're just patient, after you fill it out, there will be the little blue button to move through it and a certificate at the end. So while you're finishing that up, that's what it looks like. So I think some of you hopefully have started the survey. It's all confidential, but it really helps us know if you're connecting with the material and our format and what we can do better. So before we end, we just wanted to return to the compelling question of all the Becoming series sessions that we've had thus far this year. And that idea is a treaty intended to be forever? So we looked at, Article 7 of this treaty that is obviously, we try to break it down in an easy way between gains and losses, but there's so much irony there too, right? I mean, the Pamunkey people, are having to fight for things that they had access to before, right? Essentially. And at the same time, in a difficult time, a difficult place, they still have access to some of those resources because of that treaty. They're still here today. And they have their reservation, and they have their community and traditions. So it may not be completely tied to a treaty. I think it's very much the will of the people. But a treaty plays a role in this. So again, we want to emphasize that treaties are the U.S. supreme law of the land, and it's important to really look at them and understand what they are. So we wanted to end with a quote from a Pamunkey tribal member, Deborah Moore. She says, "Through everything our people have gone through, we survived. We held on to this land through all types of adversity, and we are still here." So with that, we really thank you for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Please look forward to an email with the resources from this evening, and let us know in the chat if you have any questions. Again, thanks so much.